Hi everyone, and welcome to the first episode of the second season of 4 Music's the Soundtrack podcast. And today I am pleased to have with me virtually in my studio Dominik Scherrer, composer of shows like Ripper Street, The Widow, The Serpent, which I absolutely love, The Tourist, and among many others. So hi Dom, and glad to be for you to be here.
Yeah, thanks George. Thanks for inviting me. And well, as you know, I admire the work that you guys are doing. So yeah, I'm happy to be here.
That's very kind. Yeah, we had the pleasure of recording some of your music for a number of those shows. So as you know, this podcast is mostly about composers geeking about composer things.
Good. I like it.
So tell me a bit about your creative process. So let's start with that.
I've sort of gotten into the habit of starting quite early on projects. I start at the script stage. I mean, it's sort of got to do with, now I'm at the stage in my career where people ask me early enough to come on board, and I'm not like the very last. They ask when there is only 2 weeks left to complete a project, and they've asked everyone else, and in the end, that's a little bit how it used to be. That's how you got the jobs when you're starting in the career. That everyone else says no or they're not available, and then you're in the end you're the only one left. But that's changed a little bit. So now they ask me early enough, which means I normally work to script these days. Actually, first I develop ideas, and think about the story, and I write a set of themes, which means during the shoot, when they're actually also editing, they already have some music to play with. So I give them stems, and if there is, even better if there is music editor, because then on board, and then they know what to do with these stems and stuff. So we are already, and then I get sort of weekly assemblies, of all the material they're shooting during the week, and then there is already some of my music on there, or I may try some stuff myself at my end. So it starting to give me a picture of how this show could work, because the possibilities are always completely wide open at the very beginning. So but if you're receiving a show that's already been cut and that has lots of temp music on by Hans Zimmer, whatnot, then whatever you're doing will be very influenced by what's on the temp music. So that's how I avoid it. So, and then I sort of try and I have some meetings with the directors, producer, and sort of try and work out what kind of vibe we could be going for. And then I try some stuff. I may do some recordings quite early on in the day as well, just to get a more textured sound in there, rather than purely working with samples, So because these days I'm often sort of want to go for almost a more stripped down, just only concentrate on the very few essentials, maybe one cello without anything, or just a guitar or something. That may be all you need for a cue, but that only really works if you've got the real thing. If you're doing like a mock-up, and then you just have a solo cello, however good that sample is, it's not going to be inspiring enough. And then what you will do is you will start to orchestrate around it to cover up the shortcomings of the sample, But if you had just the real thing playing and a great player, then it means you can work in a much more stripped down way.
Yeah, and you have because I've been to your studio. You have a great studio in London. So do you find this process also invigorating in a way, or inspiring to work with musicians? Do they push you in a way?
Yeah, I mean, it just feels more like you're a musician, and rather than somebody who sits in front of the computer all the time, so, and then, or somebody who sits in front of the computer all the time for like 2 months, and then you have like half a day to record an orchestra, and it goes bang, and then you're back in your
Yes.
little room again, so, and it's a more fluid sort of thing, because then a fluid process, because then the musician may inspire you again to change your approach a bit, or go like, oh God, that sounded really good, let's try more of that next time. Or I do, I recorded quite a lot of sort of quartets and quintets at my studio. I found orchestral approach is good, but it doesn't have to be always, and I find sometimes, everyone wants a more modern sound, and potentially a sort of more stripped down lineup is often, it may draw you more in, it may be more intimate, and then draw you in more into the story and the action.
I really liked what you said about essentially creating your own temp music. That's a pretty cool way of working, because then the show gets, or the film, or whatever you're working on, gets its own unique like voice. So I really want to ask you about, because I was so inspired by you going to Africa to record some stuff for The Widow. So how did this actually work? Was this during the beginning phase of the project, or when they already started editing the
So this was while they were shooting there. So again, I already started to write some material before they even shot some themes, and then, well, you see, it sort of started a little bit as a more opportunist thing, because it was South Africa. They were shooting in South Africa, and I've never been to South Africa. In fact, I'd never been on the African continent at all. And for me, it was I just wanted to go there. So I didn't really have a proper plan. And I told them like, we need to do this and all that. So I came up with an excuse to go, and then they said, yeah, okay, let's do it. And so they flew me over, and then I could also hook up with the production who were shooting there. But then I started I made all these different connections, and then I recorded quite a lot of material there. Some of it was in a studio in Johannesburg, where we spent maybe a couple of weeks. And it was a number of different musicians and ensembles there. And then I was traveling as well to a location which was more on the east coast of South Africa, and then to Cape Town. And it was a great sort of musical journey. I mean, The Widow is a show. It's a thriller, 8-part thriller starring Kate Beckinsale, and it's set in it's not set in South Africa. It's set in DRC, Democratic Republic of Congo. So I needed to have more that kind of sound, and it's partly because, I mean, of course, I was doing essentially a Western sort of thriller soundtrack, but there is so much amazing material in African music, and I felt like it just has to be incorporated. Because previously I'd seen a few films that were set in Africa, and they had just had like 0 African elements in there, and I thought that's like really weird, because so then either I was working in a studio, or I have a portable setup as well with laptop and an interface and microphones, and so I can also record elsewhere and record in hotel rooms and in Airbnbs and stuff like that, which is good fun.
Yeah, I can imagine this, and I actually love the show because it's first of all, it's really well shot in my opinion. There was a a number of like sequences inside that actually really grabbed my attention. And I was I was speaking to a friend of mine here in Bulgaria, and he was like, "Oh, it's shot in Africa, so everything that you shoot there, it looks great." So I suppose maybe that's the reason. But the music added so much. Yeah, in a way, I would say. But the music added so much character into it.
Yeah, and also I think I was using quite a bit of vocals. We can listen to a little bit actually. I was I was using quite a bit of vocals. I mean, one of the things about African music is that a lot of the music is actually really quite cheerful, as music should be in general. I think, I don't know, I think there is often no need for music to be so dark, but this being a thriller, that was partly the difficulty often, that working in a more minor key, particularly being in South Africa, and you may know the sort of South African sound and is sort of that kind of famous South African sound came about during the years of apartheid and all that, where the music was the complete antidote to this kind of horrible suppression that was going on. So that was one. Initially, that was a sort of a difficulty, or a difficult. No, it wasn't really, but it was a challenge. For all the musicians to also feel more at home in this darker territory. We kind of have a blast off that. This is something I recorded actually in a hotel room in Durban, mostly, and he's a great Zulu singer called Mbuzo Koza, and the track is called "Welcome to Kisima."
Cool. That was in a way a very nice implementation of ethnic music with contemporary Western music, which kind of leads me to another question, which is, how do you handle the business side of it with the creative process? Because this is a very creative process, and all your projects are very creative in a way, so you need to come up with something like this. So how do you balance the business side of being a composer with the creative side?
Well, I mean, I have a management and agency, so in a way I enjoy having the business side handled by the agency. That's one of the, even though of course sometimes I'm involved, but it's one of the great things when you are dealing with a client, that you can, if they ask you a question about, I don't know, money or something, then you just say, well, I have no idea what's going on. You have to talk to my agent, even though I may know what's going on, but it's quite nice to have this completely divided. And then of course, but then there is a business side, or a business, like a kind of admin side, that does take up an awful lot of time. This may be a lot of emails with production because of changes in schedule and notes, and arranging recording sessions, finding out what you need, getting a bit of a team on board as well. They deal with some of the orchestration or with the copying, organizing, mixing, etc. So there is because it's it's generally quite a lot of music. You're sort of producing, I don't know, maybe 45 minutes every 10 days. So it's with different, and there's always some special elements, etc. So all this takes a bit of time. So the way I've sort of done it now, that this doesn't become eternally distracting, is that I reserve the mornings for composition. I mean, the more kind of hardcore of composition, and I try not to deal with any of the admin side unless I can see it's like super urgent or.
Sure.
And then after lunch, and then I start quite early. So by lunchtime, I will have composed a fair bit of music, and then the afternoon is maybe dealt with doing notes. I mean, revisions, orchestration, maybe some preparing for recording, etc. So it's a bit of a divided.
Sure.
It's a bit of a divided day.
And when you spoke about the agents, it's because I suppose there will be people who would have just started in their career as a composer. Would you recommend them getting an agent? And how do you actually get an agent if you're at the beginning? Can you do
you
this?
Don't.
You don't. Yeah, sure.
I mean, it took because for a long time I wanted an agent, but basically, if you haven't really done enough, they're not really interested. And also, I don't think it's really that helpful then to be on the roster of an agent when you haven't got enough stuff to show. And so I was basically sorting out for a long time my own gigs, and it was possible as well. And at some point, the agents will get in touch with you because it's partly they're getting in touch with you because they may be kind of interested in what you're doing, but also because jobs for their clients are getting taken away by me. So, which annoys them. And so then the way for them to remedy the situation is to sign you up, So, and really a lot of what the agents are doing, it's, maybe sometimes they will get you a job, but a lot of it is sort of dealing with the whole financial side of the project. And then also being the ones who say no to projects because that there will be a time when you have to say no to loads of projects, and it's not a particularly nice thing to do if you know them and they ask you, but if it's your agent doing, then it's kind of nice. They can be the bad cop.
Sure. Yeah, one of the worst thing that sometimes happened to me is when a director I work with, so I have a personal connection with them, so they come over with a really, really shitty movie, and I really don't want to do this, and then I have to say no. So that's and do you participate in in demo submission? Is this because I know some agents, especially in the States, they do this a lot.
Yeah, I try and avoid it, actually. I haven't done it in a long time. What may happen is that they, if you have time and there is a really exciting project, then you put together a reel of your existing music that, could be more in the direction of what they want. But I've avoided pitching. I used to have no choice, so I pitched.
Sure.
But I do it less now. It's partly. I mean, there is also advantages, but there is the disadvantages that you don't really. Then the producers sort of feel obliged to give you a brief, and then you're doing something to that brief, and it's not really a dialogue. It's like they say something that they sometimes just pull out of thin air, and then I do something, and then they go like, oh, that's not really what we wanted. And then they just go like, well, we went with someone else, but you could do many things, so it's not such a creative process. I think the advantage is that when you pitch and they take you, then you are already some way down the line, and then you know that that's what they like, and then you know that's the right kind of sound for the job, you know. So
yeah, but essentially, would you be able to do in a pitch, do stuff like what we just talked about, something that's very custom and very, based revolving around the drama? Because sometimes you won't be, you won't have all the information about the project, and I suppose that maybe that they will also go with, in a way, more generic approach compared to.
Maybe. I mean, the one when I did pitch, I normally invested a little bit more time and money, and I normally recorded some some instrument at least for it, because as soon as you've got some live elements on there, it makes it'll stand out, immediately. So then it's much more likely that you get it, Sure. So but it has to be well played and all that. But yeah, so I think you can do something interesting, but the way it works on these kind of shows that I'm doing at the moment, there is no music brief. It never is. It's up to me to sort of come up with a concept, because otherwise they will go like, oh, what's the music? And we want it fresh and modern, and they come up with sort of generic thing that talk, and then they'll mention a few references of kind of shows that they admire, that they will mention, I don't know, Succession and Ozark and whatever. Sure. Then you get, and it's not really helpful, so and I think to find the sound for a series is a bit of a more intuitive process that you have to sort of gradually work out with them, and it's not a just sort of simple process like you would have in a pitch. Sure.
So this leads me to my next question, and I want to talk to you about the Serpent, which was it was a BBC show that was aired on Netflix, right?
Well, it was a co-production Netflix and BBC.
Yeah. It's a pretty cool series. I actually think that this is one of the best thrillers that I've watched for quite some time, and the music there is pretty unique. So you did a lot of again, getting some ethnic musicians, aiming for a certain style that's connected to a specific like era, so to say, or I don't know, genre of music. And all of this during the pandemic. So how did this work out?
Well, luckily some of it was before the pandemic, So and once again, I managed to travel to the location. So this was in Thailand, and a lot of the series is actually set in Thailand, but they were shooting in Bangkok. So and it was again slightly similar than on The Widow, where I sort of thought like, well, I want to go to Thailand, and they said, okay, you can go, and then again it turned out to be an incredibly fruitful and productive period. And I recorded again. I had these sort of elements that I recorded there in nice studios, but also in hotel rooms, etc. Quite similar to what I did on The Widow. And but of course, that project was different in a way that it wasn't really about being culturally precise, and but it was almost to reflect the sort of cultural chaos that you had in that period where it was set. So basically the series is set in sort of mostly around 1975, amongst the sort of hippie traveler community in Southeast Asia. So some of it has a bit of a, druggy vibe, and then some of it is sort of this mix of Eastern spiritualism, which was one of the things that the hippies were kind of latching on to, and then but then again, all this is part of essentially a thriller, and it's quite a dark story, and it's a true story as well, so but it had to be kind of exciting and very dangerous as well.
So do you want to listen to some of it?
Yeah, I mean, let's have a look. There's State of Flux is essentially, it became the title theme. So there is some gongs and stuff that I recorded in Thailand there, but there is also, actually, some of it was an earlier idea that I already sort of composed while I was still in London before they were shooting, and it was sort of, there is a sort of Steve Reich vibe to it, because I wanted, initially, there's a Dutch investigator in this series, and he had the more kind of minimalism, 1970s minimalism, Philip Glass, Steve Reich, blah blah, sort of elements, and then actually the one of the exec producers heard this and they said, "Oh, this is a really cool tune. This could be a really good title theme as well, if we kind of dress it more in this sort of Oriental cloak." And that's what I did, and it was his idea, and I thought it worked. Actually, it was a good idea. So let's give it a blast.
Sure. State of Flux from the Serpent. Okay, and so you used a lot of those mallets, as you said, the Steve Reich, but you also use synthesizers. So
yes, synthesizers and a lot of flutes, and there is, for example, that's something, normally you never get away with having something that's driven by piccolo flutes, because normally in the film business everyone hates piccolo. So yes. I never admitted to them that it's like 3 piccolos playing there, and then of course, there is these mallets and gongs. Now the problem is this tune is quite chromatic because it sort of changes key about 3-4 times. So the Thai instruments are diatonic, meaning you can't play this kind of tune, so we play some elements of it, and then also while I was there, I sampled all those instruments so I could fill in the chromatic gaps there or change it, so. And then another element that was sort of there, which you may have heard, is this sort of backwards guitar stuff, and this is sort of a little bit inspired by the sort of Beatle, Paul McCartney doing all these kind of tape loops at home, and with guitar and speeding them up and slowing down, and this is because that's a little bit how this series then worked. There were certain elements of the period in there, but it was never meant to sound like something from the 70s, but I just wanted to pick some elements that were clearly of the period and had the sort of maybe the 70s vibe, but overall have a more modern sound, because we also had, of course, tracks. We had Led Zeppelin and Serge Gainsbourg, etc. in there that were then clearly defining, the period setting.
Sure. And I remember that we worked together on the collection, which is an Amazon show.
Yeah.
And there was, again, this kind of Steve Reich. I think you mentioned to me that it was declined at the end. It was scrapped as an idea with the saxophones doing these.
Yeah. No. Well, no. I think it was. No. I think it was. It was in there. Yeah. Yeah. I think it was in there. Yeah. Yeah. Quite a sort of. Yeah. That was quite sort of funky stuff, wasn't it? Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. That was really cool combination between strings, live strings, and saxophones. Which is one of the beauties of film music in a way, because it gives you so much, variety and options to experiment, to do different things.
Yeah. I mean, of course, even something like the Serpent encompasses quite a bit, because it's quite a big world that you have to convey with this, and many different aspects, and some of it is really very dark, and it's you can't. Sometimes I watch stuff and I find like I watch a film and then I sort of think like they're not doing something particularly interesting for the really dark stuff, so and it's not easy, doing something interesting. I mean, so yeah, you mentioned earlier synth stuff, so on the Serpent. So one of the sort of things I heard was this kind of 1970s modular stuff on a synth called Tonto, which was a very, very, very large modular synth based in LA at the time, and there was different people, like Stevie Wonder, etc., worked on it, and Michael Jackson later, but also some more experimental material was produced on it, and I thought it sounded really interesting, and it sounded different to the sort of modular stuff you're hearing today, and then as it happened. When I was in Bangkok, I met up with, I don't know if you've heard of Stefan Baer from Sonic Underworld. He's a synth programmer who programs for a lot of software platforms, but also a lot of hardware. And then he kind of helped me to get that sort of sound because also he had connections to he was using the same technician who used to service Tonto synth in LA, etc. Awesome. So he knew the modules and all that. And so we programmed those sounds in Zebra, actually, Yuhi Zebra, because it's so flexible. And so you can hear we can just have a quick blast of that. And there is a track called Homicidal Übermensch, which is a Nietzsche-inspired title. I can talk about the Nietzsche thing afterwards as well. But that gives you an idea of the kind of darkness I tried to convey.
Okay. So this was all done with those presets, the percussion and the
That was pretty much all sort of Tonto inspired sounds. I mean, a lot of it is quite simple, just noise with these kind of custom envelopes that you repeat, etc. So, in the end, it worked quite well for these kind of, or that kind of approach worked well for this kind of super dark side of that series.
And how accustomed are you to synths yourself? I mean, do you have like hardware synths? Do you use hardware synths?
Yes, I do. I mean, I come more from a hardware synth. In a way, that was my first when I started writing scores. The first ones were extremely synth orientated. I was very much initially, and it was one of the reasons why I wanted to get into scoring as well, was the sort of synth soundtrack of the German sort of krautrock, Popol Vuh, the films of Werner Herzog and stuff, this sort of quite grand sounding 1970s synth stuff. So my first synth that I bought was an old Polymoog, which is this kind of crazy, fully polyphonic synth, very temperamental, and then I did all the soundtracks on that, and it
Awesome.
definitely had a sort of very synthy vibe, and I had another little very cheap Italian monophonic synth which was quite good as well. So that's a little bit how it started. And then, even though I was sort of a classically trained musician as well, but my heart actually was in synths at that time. And then the live stuff gradually came into it up to a point where I did only live stuff and everything had to be live. And then I started again with the synths. And so now I have a few synths, not as many as I used to. But then also, interestingly, when lockdown happened at the beginning of COVID, I couldn't use my studio, so I had to work from home on a home setup, and I just had software synths, and then but also I had a little bit more time, because all the schedules started to completely fall apart. So then I made a point of actually spending a few days just with the manual and Yuhei Diva, which I think is a really great soft synth. And so I do quite a lot in that, actually. And because when you work hard and when you don't start with these presets, I think the problem is a little bit that a lot of people start with some presets that already have got, lots of modulation and effects on there. And then, it can potentially be quite hard to change the sound because there's always some stuff going on there that you can't actually work out. Maybe you don't know where it comes from, you don't know how to turn it off and all that, Whereas if you're starting from a completely very straight, just a wave, and then you add to it, you can actually create something quite exciting. And it's quite similar to working with a hardware synth. So but I use I have a little box called Boomstar, and it's sort of based on an ARP 2600 synth, and it's a great analog synth, and I use that quite a lot, because it's just got a sort of huge sound. Actually, I mean, because you may remember, that's what I recorded with you guys, The City and the City, that there is a sort of bass line that's very prominent in that, and that's all that's the sort of the Boomstar sound.
Do you want to?
Yes, though I had to transpose it up a semitone, because otherwise your bassist would have had to play in C minor at the bottom, which is not very nice because you have all these open strings. So there is, in fact, there is. Let's first listen to, this is the pure synth version, and it's called Orientation School. And we can just have a quick blast of that, because that's sort of a little bit how it originally sounded. So this basically is, this tune is played live just straight without MIDI. I think into like I think there's three voices in there, and that's it. There is 3 passes, and they were
Nice.
played from live beginning to end, and then after that, I thought like, well, we can also do a bigger version of this, which then is for the arrival in. Oh, well, I will talk about the project in a moment, but this is more a kind of science fiction project. So this is arriving in this kind of futurist city, but that's more has a kind of 1980s sort of. I always imagined this something as if Dubai was ruled by Margaret Thatcher or something like that. So that's sort of what you have to imagine. And so then we basically, it's exactly the same tune that then was recorded, was overdubbed, and again these 3 voices were just simply doubled with a string orchestra, and sometimes in octaves, maybe a little bit, but it's very simple. There is only kind of 3 lines in there, and that's called Temple of Light. Yeah, so on this, even like the percussion is just done on a mono synth. That's just on a Moog.
Like noise, yeah.
Yeah, just with a noise percussion. But it's it's sort of, it makes it quite big, that sort of unison doubling of these monophonic synth lines with string orchestra.
Yeah.
Nicely played.
Thank you. And what's now that we speak about the live orchestra, what are the biggest challenges, do you think, from your perspective, from the recording, maybe also pre-production point of view, and also recording?
Well, I mean, sometimes it can be just practically, because you need to. I mean, one thing is what I touched upon earlier, is that I need to do a mock-up before and then convince my producers that, this is what we want. Now, if it's something that you could as well do with a sampled orchestra, then I think there is not much point in actually even recording it live, So I'm interested in sort of, nice emotional playing or special techniques, etc. So again, this is quite difficult to mock up, and for me, sometimes you hear soundtrack stuff where you can't tell if this is live or not, because it was written very much for sampled orchestra. They may then overdub some live orchestra, and for me, then that's a little bit pointless, So I think that's one of the difficulties is actually sort of doing something that's maybe slightly more adventurous, but you at the same time you need to keep your production on board. And the other consideration is practical as well, that you need to, if it's a larger group ensemble, you need to book this in advance. And then these days my schedules have become more messy. There's always delays on the cut and this and that, and so if you've got your booked dates and then suddenly the schedule shifts, that can become really quite stressful, because you may suddenly have to record this earlier than you anticipated, and you're not really ready, but you have to honor your booked date. So so I find the challenges are more kind of on the practical side. I mean, of course, there are some, sometimes with recording, I don't know, keeping material in time, when you have another backing, or sometimes intonation, and maybe this sort of, well, the difficulty that you want something that sort of keeps an intimacy. I think with an orchestra sometimes there is a sort of tendency of everything becoming a little bit more distant, because it's a large group. So that's kind of artistically, I find sometimes more challenging. But I find normally for me the challenges are more on the sort of admin and practical side.
Sure. And by distant, you mean like sonically, opposed to like intimate, or?
Yes, I mean it's there is a sort of tendency to then have this a bit like a symphony orchestra, in a nice hall, and I find that's can be a little bit. Just put a kind of distance between. It's nice to have the size, but it's like you're hearing another set of characters, i.e. the orchestra, who are in a different space to where the action is happening. So
it would be weird to see Kate Beckinsale and in Congo running from jeeps and then hear. Fugue at the background, like orchestral. So
I
mean, it could work out, but it depends on the genre, I suppose. So with Indiana Jones, that it kind of blends, I think, with the picture, but maybe in a more realistic, not so heroic, adventurous film.
Yeah. Well, yes, but I mean, for me, sometimes I even do have stuff. I have a problem sometimes with that genre of something like Indiana Jones. So that's not necessarily something I would aspire to. But then you sometimes you do want it bigger and to become more sweeping, and the way to do it is to build up to it, sort of subliminally, or more subtly, so you're kind of starting small, and then at some point, it's actually quite big, but no one realizes.
Sure.
So that's one way, or another trick would be that this sort of sound you start maybe with being heard as part of something else, like heard on the radio or in a play that's happening on the screen, and then kind of takes over as the score, etc. But I just sort of feel sometimes it needs to be justified.
Yes, understood. And what about the tourists? This is, I think, the latest thing that you've worked on.
Yeah, I mean, the latest thing that's come out, yes, not that I've worked on.
That's what I mean.
Yes, so Well, again, that's sort of that has got an orchestral component. I mean, small orchestral. A lot of it is more string quartets and there's some larger ensembles on there as well. But a lot of it is kind of strange sounds and these are again the writers Jack and Harry Williams, and they're more in the sort of rock pop world, I think, and so for them they never really wanted too classical, so these are the writers and the producers basically. And so the way their scripts work is it works. The first show I did that they wrote was called The Missing, and again we went more for a kind of post-rock sound on that, and The Tourist is a more, there is a sort of a bit of a kind of redneck side to it, a bit of a kind of desert Arizona thing in there, but then it's overall quite exotic and has just a lot of kind of unexpected elements in there.
Because actually, that's where the show is based at, right? In the United States.
It's set in Australia. And
in Australia, okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay.
In the Australian outback, though, yeah. Which has a bit of a kind of desert vibe to it.
I still haven't watched it, but I've listened to the soundtrack, and there are a lot of guitars in there.
Yeah.
So anything different? Do you play the guitar yourself, or?
No, I don't actually. But I like, or it's guitar, and then a lot of I use a lot of sort of ukulele and charango on Rocco, and even for more elements that don't really sound like guitar, for a lot of kind of pads and atmospherics, etc. It's just sometimes more interesting than using synths, I think. So, and I happen to know a few very good guitarists, So, and I think just having some plucked elements in there kind of brings the material sort of forward and makes it interesting.
Do you want to listen to something from it?
Yeah, we can. We kind of have a quick. We kind of listen to a track that then I just called The Tourist. Yeah, we have a blast of that.
Nice. So, again, from my perspective, I'm really astounded at the variety of stuff that you can write. From like Reaper Street, which is very kind of Americana in a way, I would say even steampunkish. in sound to something like this. And the Serpent, that's really, really amazing. Is this something that you learn? How do you learn this? How do you learn to
Yeah, well, you learn it on the job as well, because it's really, because I just want each project to have its own unique sound, that, because I think it helps the viewer to immerse themselves into it more, and it's not like they think like, oh, they've heard this before and that's from there and there, or that's a little bit like blah blah blah, so I want it to be unique, and then sometimes you just learn really how to do it, and I find I have to research on almost every project. I've done stuff in kind of 16th, 15th century choral where I had to research, how to write that kind of choral, or kind of more 18th century, 19th century, etc. So, and then each time you research, but that's the fun part, isn't it? So
sure, yeah.
And then of course there is maybe some new instruments that you have to deal with as well, and I think a lot of soundtrack stuff is not, you're not really having to be authentic in any way. It's about creating something unique and interesting. So then that sort of gives you a bit of freedom, and then sure. It's not like people will then go like, well, that's not done right because it should be like that. It's because it's you just doing it to help the story and making it interesting and emotional. So
and the story, it's visuals and everything, it's not also 100% accurate to the, especially in so there's always some sort of a creative compromise. And so what would be the advice then that you would give to a younger version of yourself?
To get started in a career, or
just for writing music for film or games?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't know. I guess everyone is different. I mean, as I said, the way my early things I did was just the things I was excited about at the time, but I had of course, there's no one who gave me any jobs, and not even, a student filmmaker would give me a job. So I had to make my own films, so that's how I started really. And I made, films. Sometimes they were animations, or I went to the woods and filmed this and that. And then partly because I wanted to do scoring as well, so then they became these little films with these soundtracks, and it started to get more and more ambitious, and I started to then eventually adapt classic pieces of literature and make kind of more hour-long pieces, but with this kind of the Polymoog synth soundtrack, etc. So you don't necessarily need to kind of, I don't know, score other films. You just start scoring whatever, your own, and all this is now, much more possible now, because you can make a good movie on an iPhone, so
that's right. Yeah, much easier today nowadays.
Yeah. So and so that's one thing, and then also to sort of carry on. I mean, what. At that time, I wouldn't be, I don't know, there is sometimes a sort of tendency now, because there is a lot of kind of communication on the internet, etc., which is really great, and there is all these forums, etc., but then somehow I felt like everything gravitated to a certain sort of sound that is now accepted as being the kind of soundtrack, which is, a lot of it is maybe derived from the kind of Hans Zimmer school of, soundtrack, this sort of hybrid synth orchestral, etc., that somehow everyone thinks that is soundtrack, or maybe then, or the other thing is like a John Williams type
Sure.
Soundtrack, you know. So, but you know, I think it's sometimes to sort of see, you know, how much other stuff there is, you know. When I then really started seriously to kind of really want to do soundtrack is when I came to England, and at that time, you know, this was the time when Peter Greenaway, the filmmaker, was really popular with all the soundtracks by Michael Nyman, and for me that was so fresh and new, and I thought, like, what's this? Is so exciting, and you know, to have this kind of sort of minimalism style music, but a sort of very English sound to it, and then you know, this kind of driving stuff against this sort of speeded up footage, etc. You know, so I thought, you know, and I think it's sort of, you know, seeking out interesting new things, you know, helps, and don't get sort of too bogged down in what everyone sort of thinks a soundtrack should be, because it can be, you know, anything.
And speaking about Michael Nyman, what would your dream project be?
Well, dream project, you know, I'm working on some, because another thing I'm interested in is sort of opera and vocals and writing for voice, and so I've done out of a couple of operas. It's quite a while ago now, you know, but that were done for the screen. They were kind of exciting projects, and one of them did really well and won lots of prizes, went to Sundance Festival, etc. So and I'm working on a couple of longer projects, a little bit like that are kind of music driven in a way, a little bit, you know, similar to what I just mentioned earlier in the early days, when I kind of, in order to do scoring, I just had to go to the woods myself and film some footage and then score it, you know. So in a way, that's still what I want to do now, you know, to something that's sort of music driven. But now I'm embarking on a big I'm doing a lot of research for a project that's set in the Middle Ages, etc. So then these are kind of, I guess, yeah, these are, you could call dream projects or pet projects.
Pet projects, yeah, amazing. And now, as a final question to this wonderful podcast, what would be your like 3 most favorite composers or soundtracks, films or games?
Yeah, our games, yeah. God, there's a lot of great game stuff, but I don't play games, so I'm not familiar with them enough. But films, yes, of course, and of course, you know, there is stuff. There are soundtracks that are brilliant and will influence you, you know, throughout your life, and these are classics that everyone likes, you know, Herman's Psycho, and you know, some of the John Williams stuff, some of the Ennio Morricone stuff, you know, but then also there are some soundtracks that, yeah, sort of inspire me. And recently, I thought I really liked the work of Nicholas Britell. You know, a lot of people know his work from, you know, because he did Succession, but you know, the film Vice that he scored, I thought that was just a brilliant soundtrack. It had a kind of jazzy and Aaron Copland sort of vibe about it, but it was kind of big and orchestral and had a lot of drive. Yeah, so Vice I loved a lot. And then of course I like Alexandre Desplat, and many of his soundtracks I like, and one that maybe not so many people know is, you know, The Ghostwriter, or The Ghost, I think, as it was called, in the Polanski movie.
Yeah, with the bassoon. That was I think.
Yeah, sort of bass clarinet, and you know, he's very good with using woodwinds, and it's an interesting one because it's a kind of dangerous thriller, but you know, there is something kind of theatrical about, or almost sort of cabaret-ish about that soundtrack, or something, you know, but it made it really exciting. A kind of unexpected combination, you know, which is very exciting, I think. And then, you know, there are other soundtrack, you know, if you, for example, again as a composer, if you I've done some action series, where you then have to write, long action cues, and then you look at what other people have done, and then one of the kings of that kind of music is Alan Silvestri, and for example, the Van Helsing soundtrack. Is a great,
yes.
It's sort of because he managed. I don't think anyone else can do this. To write like a 10-minute action cue that isn't, it's not like one that starts really small and then gets really big at the end. It starts huge, and it stays huge. It just doesn't relent. It never stops, and it just gets bigger and bigger. And you think, how is it now? You have to kind of have a breakdown and then start small again. But he never does that, and this is really, really difficult to do, as a composer, to maintain this relentless excitement all the time. So I like stuff like that as well. Yeah.
Awesome. And I think this will be a nice, now that we spoke about different composers, different styles. First of all, what I got from talking to you is that composers need to listen to music. I think that's very important, because a lot of, and listen to music that is maybe sometimes even out of their comfort zone. What you're doing with those researches and getting to know different styles and different stylistic approaches, that's great. I mean, your music speaks for itself.
Listen to stuff that's not soundtrack, basically. I think that sometimes that can be, I think, a problem. And I notice it with myself as well. Then you sort of think like, oh yeah, let's see what they have done. But really, you should be listening to, I don't know, Nick Cave or some, Purcell or something like that. So.
Yeah. And I also want to make an announcement that we here at Fourth Music will also start our scoring contest, and we are really pleased to have Dom on the jury, and we'll obviously share some details on our Facebook, Instagram, website, and newsletter. But it will be a really nice, I think, competition for composers on one movie that I actually scored a few years ago. So that would be pretty cool. I'm really excited to hear what other people would do against that picture. Yeah.
So what's going to happen if they do something better than you did?
Geez, this is something that I haven't thought of yet, but we'll see. Probably there'll be much better composers than me on that competition. I'm sure of it. But the film it's like a period drama based on a story of a Bulgarian author, really famous Bulgarian author. So it looks pretty cool. It was shot really nice. Lots of nature involved. So that would be a nice journey.
Yeah, I can't wait to hear all the entries.
Yeah, likewise. All right. Thank you so much for spending the time and for sharing your insight and your creative process. Really appreciate it.
Pleasure. Yeah, it was really nice talking to a fellow composer, and also, as mentioned, I like what you're doing with all the live recording there, and I look forward to doing more of that as well.
Lovely. Thank you. All right. Cheers.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Bye.